Block 1. I never imagined that the person I trusted most would turn my deepest pain into ammunition against me. 6 months after burying my husband of 28 years, I discovered that my closest friend had been systematically destroying my reputation behind my back, telling anyone who would listen that my grief was nothing more than an elaborate performance for sympathy and attention. What I'm about to tell you is absolutely true and will leave you speechless. Please like and subscribe. Tell me which city you call home. My name is Margaret Clark. I'm 53 years old, and until recently, I thought I knew exactly who I could count on in this world. My husband David passed away suddenly from a heart attack last October, leaving me completely shattered. We had built a life together that revolved around quiet Sunday mornings, shared crossword puzzles, and planning our retirement travels. When he died, it felt like someone had torn away half of my soul. The morning everything changed started like any other difficult day in my new reality. I was sitting at my kitchen table, still in my robe at 11 a.m., staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The house felt impossibly quiet without David's morning routine of humming while he made breakfast and rattling through the newspaper. I had barely managed to shower 3 times that week, and getting dressed felt like climbing a mountain. That's when my daughter Emma called. Emma Clark Morrison, 26 years old, had been my lifeline since her father's death. She lived about 30 minutes away with her own family, but she called me every single day and visited twice a week, often bringing groceries or just sitting with me when the silence became too overwhelming. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," Emma said, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Can I come over right now?" "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay with the kids?" I asked, immediately shifting into mother mode despite my own fog of grief. "The kids are fine. This is about you, Mom. About what people are saying about you." My stomach dropped. In the months since David's death, I had barely left the house except for necessities. I couldn't imagine what anyone would have to say about me. "What do you mean?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just prepare yourself, okay? This is going to be hard to hear." After Emma hung up, I forced myself to get dressed and make a fresh pot of coffee. My hands were shaking as I measured the grounds, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Emma needed to tell me was going to shatter what little stability I had managed to build. When Emma arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept. Her usually perfectly styled blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She hugged me tighter than usual and held on longer. "Mom, I don't know how to say this gently, so I'm just going to be direct," she began, settling into the chair across from me at the kitchen table. "I was at the grocery store yesterday, and I overheard Mrs. Patterson from your book club talking to someone I didn't recognize. She was saying terrible things about you." "What kind of terrible things?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Emma took a deep breath. "She was saying that your grief over Dad's death is fake, that you're just putting on an act to get attention and sympathy from people. She said you're being dramatic, and that real widows don't carry on the way you do." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Patricia Patterson had been one of my closest friends for over 15 years. We met at the book club at the local library and bonded over our shared love of mystery novels and terrible romantic comedies. She had been one of the first people to call after David died, bringing casseroles and offering to help with funeral arrangements. She sat in the front row at his service and held my hand during the eulogy. "That doesn't make sense," I whispered. "Patricia has been so supportive. She was just here last week, telling me to take all the time I need to heal." "Mom, there's more," Emma said gently. I confronted Mrs. Patterson directly. At first, she tried to deny it, but then she doubled down. She said that 6 months is long enough to mourn, and that you're using Dad's death as an excuse to be lazy and get out of your responsibilities. She said real grief looks different, and that you're just seeking attention. The words hit me like physical blows. Patricia Patterson, 58 years old, had been widowed herself 12 years ago when her husband Frank died in a car accident. I remembered being there for her during that time, bringing her meals, helping her navigate insurance paperwork, and listening when she needed to talk about Frank. I thought she, of all people, would understand what I was going through. "She actually said that to you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "She did. And Mom, I'm worried this isn't the first time she said these things. The way she was talking, it sounded like she's been spreading this story for a while. She mentioned that she's talked to people from your book club, some of your neighbors, and even people at Dad's old work." I put my head in my hands, feeling overwhelmed by a mixture of grief, betrayal, and humiliation. Why would she do this to me? I thought she was my friend. I thought she understood. "I don't know, Mom, but we need to figure out how to handle this. Your reputation in the community is being destroyed, and it's not fair. You're dealing with losing the love of your life, and instead of getting the support you need, your closest friend is sabotaging you behind your back." Just then, there was a knock at the front door. Emma and I looked at each other, both wondering who it could be. I wasn't expecting anyone, and most people had stopped visiting regularly after the first month following David's funeral. "I'll get it," Emma said, but I was already standing up. "No, it's okay. I need to start facing the world again, eventually." I opened the door to find Janet Rodriguez, my neighbor from 3 houses down. Janet was 62, retired from her job as a school administrator, and had always been friendly in that neighborly way where we waved when we saw each other and chatted briefly if we met while getting the mail. Since David's death, she had been surprisingly thoughtful, occasionally dropping off baked goods or offering to pick up groceries when she was going to the store. "Hi, Margaret," Janet said, looking unusually serious. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything, but I really needed to talk to you about something I heard. May I come in?" My heart sank. Another conversation about what people were saying about me. "Of course, Janet. Come in. Emma's here too." Janet followed me into the kitchen, where Emma was still sitting at the table. After I introduced them properly, Janet sat down and looked directly at me with concern in her dark brown eyes. "Margaret, I'm going to be frank with you because I think you deserve to know what's being said about you around the neighborhood. I was at the community center yesterday for my yoga class, and I overheard a conversation that made my blood boil." "Let me guess," I said wearily. "Someone was talking about how I'm faking my grief?" Janet's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "So you already know?" "We're just finding out," Emma said. "My mom's friend Patricia has been spreading rumors that Mom is being dramatic and attention-seeking about losing my father." "Well, Patricia Patterson was definitely part of the conversation I overheard," Janet confirmed. "She was talking to a group of women, including some people I recognized from your book club. She was going on and on about how you're milking your husband's death for sympathy, how you're being manipulative by staying sad for so long, and how she's tired of people enabling your performance." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock that David had hung in our kitchen 15 years ago. I stared at that clock, remembering how he had spent an entire Saturday afternoon making sure it was perfectly level, using a ruler and everything. Such a small, ordinary memory, but it hit me like a wave of fresh grief. "Margaret?" Janet's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you okay?" "I don't understand," I said, my voice cracking. 6 months feels like yesterday to me. I can barely get through each day. I still set 2 coffee cups out in the morning sometimes. I still reach for the phone to call him when something interesting happens. How is that fake? It's not fake, Mom, Emma said firmly. Anyone who knows you can see that you're genuinely struggling. The fact that you're still in pain doesn't make you manipulative. It makes you human. Janet nodded emphatically. That's exactly what I wanted to tell you. I lost my mother 2 years ago, and there are still days when I pick up the phone to call her. Grief doesn't follow a timeline, and anyone who says it does is either incredibly lucky to have never experienced real loss, or they're dealing with their own issues. What exactly did Patricia say? I asked, needing to know the full extent of the damage. Janet hesitated, clearly not wanting to hurt me further. She said that you're using your widowhood as an excuse to avoid your responsibilities. She mentioned that you've been skipping book club meetings, that you don't maintain your yard the way you used to, and that you've been asking for help with things you should be able to handle yourself. She said, it's all a performance to get people to feel sorry for you. Each word felt like another betrayal. Yes, I had missed book club meetings, because sitting in a room full of people discussing fictional problems felt impossible when I could barely handle my real ones. Yes, my yard looked terrible because David had always been the gardener, and every time I tried to work in the flower beds he had planted, I ended up sobbing. And yes, I had asked for help with things like changing light bulbs and moving heavy boxes, because David had always done those things, and I was still learning how to live alone. I can't believe she's turning my struggle into evidence that I'm lying, I said, feeling anger beginning to mix with my hurt. There's something else, Janet said carefully. Patricia mentioned that she's been documenting things. She said she's been keeping track of when you ask for help, what you say about missing your husband, and how you act in social situations. She called it evidence that your grief isn't genuine. She's been keeping a record of my mourning process? I asked, incredulous. That's what it sounded like. Margaret, I have to ask, is there any history between you and Patricia that might explain why she's doing this? Any conflict or competition that might have triggered this behavior? I thought back over my 15-year friendship with Patricia, searching for clues. We had always gotten along well. We shared similar interests, similar senses of humor, and had supported each other through various life challenges. When her husband Frank died, I had been there for her consistently. When my mother died 5 years ago, she had been supportive. I couldn't think of any major conflicts or disagreements. There was one thing, I said slowly, a memory surfacing. About a month before David died, Patricia mentioned that she was interested in applying to be the coordinator for the book club. It's a volunteer position, but it comes with a small stipend from the library. I had been thinking about applying for the same position because David and I were planning to travel more in retirement, and I thought the extra money would help. Did you both apply? Emma asked. No, David died before I had a chance to submit an application. Patricia got the position by default because no one else was interested. But I can't imagine that would be enough to make her do this to me. You'd be surprised what people will do when they feel threatened or competitive, Janet said. Even over small things, but regardless of her motivation, what she's doing to you is cruel and wrong. I looked around my kitchen, at the life David and I had built together, now forever changed by his absence and by the betrayal of someone I had trusted completely. The coffee maker he had programmed every night before bed. The little notepad where he used to write shopping lists in his careful handwriting. The ceramic mug with World's Best Dad that Emma had made in elementary school, which he used every morning until the day he died. What am I supposed to do now? I asked. How do I face people in this community knowing that Patricia has been poisoning them against me? How do I defend myself against accusations that my love for my husband is fake? First, you remember that the people who truly know and care about you won't believe Patricia's lies, Emma said. Second, We figure out a way to address this directly. We can't let her destroy your reputation and your support system while you're trying to heal. I agree, Janet said. And I want you to know that you have allies. I didn't just come here to tell you about the rumors. I came here to let you know that I spoke up. When I heard Patricia talking, I interrupted and told that entire group that I've been watching you navigate this loss with grace and genuine pain, and that anyone spreading rumors about a grieving widow should be ashamed of themselves. You defended me? I asked, feeling a flicker of warmth in my chest. Of course I did, and I won't be the only one. The people who matter will see through Patricia's manipulation. But you need to be prepared for the fact that this might get worse before it gets better. People love gossip, and Patricia seems committed to this narrative she's created about you. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, we're going to figure this out together. You don't have to face this alone. I squeezed her hand, feeling grateful for my daughter's fierce loyalty and for Janet's unexpected support. But I also felt overwhelmed by the task ahead of us. Patricia had a months-long head start in spreading her version of my story. She had the advantage of being the one telling the tale, while I had been too buried in grief to defend myself. There's something else I need to tell you, I said to both of them. Something that might explain why Patricia's accusations feel so devastating. They both looked at me expectantly. I've been struggling with guilt about my grief. Sometimes I wonder if I am being too dramatic, if I should be further along in the healing process. When David first died, people were so supportive and patient. But as the months have gone on, I felt pressure to bounce back and return to normal. Patricia's accusations are hitting me so hard because part of me has been wondering the same things about myself. Oh, Mom, Emma said softly. That's exactly what grief does. It makes you question everything, including your own reactions. But that doesn't mean your feelings aren't valid or real. Emma's right, Janet added. The fact that you're questioning yourself shows how genuine your grief is. Someone who was truly faking would be more confident in their performance, not constantly worried about whether they were doing it right. I nodded, feeling some of the tight knot in my chest beginning to loosen slightly. So, what do we do now? How do we handle Patricia and the damage she's already done? First, we gather information, Emma said. We need to know exactly what she's been saying and to whom. Then we can decide whether to confront her directly or address the rumors some other way. I can help with that, Janet offered. I have connections throughout the community, and I can discreetly ask around to see how widespread this has become. I can also continue to speak up when I hear people repeating Patricia's lies. I appreciate that, Janet. I really do. But I'm scared about what else we might find out. What if she's convinced everyone? What if the entire community thinks I'm some kind of manipulative fraud? Then we'll deal with that when we come to it, Emma said firmly. But I refuse to let Patricia Patterson destroy my mother's reputation while she's grieving the loss of her life partner. We're going to fight this, Mom. Together. I looked at my daughter, seeing so much of David's determination in her expression, and felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe I didn't have to face this betrayal alone. Maybe there were people who would stand by me and help me navigate this nightmare that Patricia had created. One small detail blew the whole thing open. Over the next few days, our plan began to take shape. Emma stayed close to home, working remotely so she could support me through this difficult time. The dynamic between us had shifted in a way I hadn't expected. For months after David's death, she had been the one checking on me, worrying about me, treating me like I might break at any moment. Now, seeing me face this betrayal head-on, She seemed to recognize that I still had fight left in me. "You know, Mom," she said one morning as we sat over coffee, "I've been so focused on protecting you that I forgot how strong you are. Dad always said you were tougher than you looked." Her words brought tears to my eyes, but they were different tears than I'd been crying for months. These weren't just tears of grief, but of recognition and gratitude for my daughter's faith in me. Janet proved to be an invaluable ally. She returned 2 days later with information that both relieved and horrified me. The good news was that Patricia's poison hadn't spread as widely as I'd feared. Many people in our circle had been too polite to engage with her gossip or had dismissed her comments entirely. Mrs. Henderson shut Patricia down completely when she tried to bring it up at book club, Janet reported. And several people have mentioned to me that they thought Patricia's comments seemed petty and inappropriate, especially given what you've been through. But there was disturbing news, too. Patricia has been more persistent with some people than others, Janet continued carefully. She seems to be targeting anyone who's shown you particular kindness or support. It's like she's systematically trying to undermine your closest relationships. Emma's face darkened. That's calculated. That's not just someone being thoughtless or jealous. That's deliberate cruelty. I felt a chill run through me. Why would she do that? We've been friends for over 15 years. We've been through so much together. That afternoon, as I was going through some of David's papers, I found something that made everything click into place. Tucked inside one of his old appointment books was a note in his handwriting. Spoke with Patricia about the committee position. Had to let her know we're recommending Margaret instead. She didn't take it well. The committee position? I had completely forgotten. 6 months before David's diagnosis, our neighborhood association had been looking for a new treasurer. Both Patricia and I had been considered, but ultimately they had chosen me. David, as the outgoing president, had been part of that decision. I showed the note to Emma and Janet when they arrived for dinner that evening. "So, this has been building for over a year," Emma said, shaking her head. "She's been nursing this resentment all this time, and Dad's death gave her an opening to strike back." "But that's so petty," I said. "It was just a volunteer position in a neighborhood committee." "For some people, any rejection feels huge," Janet said sadly. "And losing to someone she considered a friend probably made it worse. In her mind, you didn't just get chosen over her. You took something that should have been hers." Emma was pacing now, her anger building. "So she waited until you were at your most vulnerable and decided to destroy your reputation? While you're grieving, Dad? That's not just petty, that's evil." I looked at my daughter, seeing how this betrayal had affected her too. She was protective by nature, something she'd inherited from David, and watching someone attack her grieving mother had awakened something fierce in her. "I want to confront her," I said suddenly. "I want to look her in the eye and ask her why she's doing this." "Are you sure that's wise?" Janet asked. "Sometimes confronting someone like this just gives them more ammunition." "Maybe," I said. "But I need to understand. I need to hear from her own mouth why she's chosen to hurt me this way. And I need her to see that I know what she's been doing." Emma nodded slowly. "If you want to do this, I'll be there with you. But we do it on our terms, not hers." We spent the evening planning the confrontation. It felt strange, strategizing against someone who had once been such a close friend. I kept thinking about all the times Patricia and I had supported each other through difficult periods, all the laughs we'd shared, all the ways she'd been woven into the fabric of my life with David. "I keep thinking there must be some mistake," I admitted to Emma as we prepared for bed. Maybe she doesn't realize how much damage she's causing. Maybe if I explain how her words are affecting me, she'll stop. Emma's expression was gentle but concerned. Mom, people who care about your feelings don't spread rumors about you being a fake when you're grieving. I'm worried you're still thinking of her as the friend she used to be, instead of seeing her as she is now. That night, I lay awake thinking about friendship and betrayal, about how well we really know the people we trust with our secrets and our sorrows. Patricia had been at David's funeral. She had hugged me and cried with me and promised to be there for whatever I needed. How had we gotten from that moment to this one? The next morning, I called Patricia and asked if I could come over to talk. There was something in my tone that must have warned her, because after a pause, she agreed with obvious reluctance. I'll be there in an hour, I told her. Emma squeezed my hand. Remember, you don't owe her explanations or apologies. You're going there for answers, not to make her feel better about what she's done. As I drove to Patricia's house, I felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. Whatever happened in the next hour would change everything between us forever. But what Patricia said when I walked through her door was something I never could have prepared for. Patricia opened her front door before I could even knock, as if she'd been watching from the window. Her face was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. For a moment, we just looked at each other, and I saw something that shocked me. She looked afraid. Come in, she said quietly, stepping aside. I followed her into the living room where we'd shared so many conversations over the years. The familiarity of it made this moment feel even more surreal. Patricia sat down heavily on her couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I know why you're here, she said before I could speak. Do you? I asked, settling into the chair across from her. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. Because I'm not sure I understand anything anymore, Patricia. I've been hearing some very hurtful things, and your name keeps coming up. She closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. I never meant for it to get back to you. The admission hit me like a physical blow. Part of me had still been hoping this was all a misunderstanding, that there was some innocent explanation. So it's true. You've been telling people that my grief is fake. Not fake, exactly, she said, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. I said that maybe you were drawing it out longer than necessary, that maybe you were enjoying the attention. Enjoying the attention? I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Patricia, I lost my husband, the love of my life. How could you possibly think I would enjoy any part of this nightmare? She looked up at me then, and I saw tears in her eyes, but also something else, resentment. Because you've always been the center of attention. Even in grief, you're the tragic widow that everyone rallies around. People who barely spoke to me before now ask about you constantly. How's Margaret doing? What can we do for Margaret? Poor Margaret. I stared at her, struggling to process what I was hearing. You're jealous of my grief? I'm tired of being invisible, she said, her voice cracking. Do you know how that feels? To watch everyone fawn over someone else's tragedy while your own problems don't matter to anyone? What problems? I asked, genuinely confused. Patricia, if you're going through something, why didn't you tell me? We're friends, or I thought we were. She laughed bitterly. See? You don't even know. You've been so wrapped up in your own pain that you haven't noticed mine exists. I felt a flash of anger then. My husband died 6 months ago. Yes, I've been wrapped up in that. But you never told me you were struggling with something. How was I supposed to know? I shouldn't have to tell you, she snapped. A real friend would notice. The unfairness of it took my breath away. So instead of talking to me, you decided to destroy my reputation behind my back? Patricia's face crumpled. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It started as just venting, I guess. I was angry and hurt, and when Janet mentioned how worried she was about you, I just said maybe she didn't need to be so concerned. That maybe you were milking it a little. And then it snowballed, I said, the pieces falling into place. Yes, she whispered. And once I'd said those things, I couldn't take them back. People started agreeing with me, and I felt important, like my opinion mattered for once. I sat in silence for a long moment, trying to reconcile this bitter, jealous woman with the friend I thought I'd known. Patricia, what's really going on with you? What are these problems you think I should have noticed? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. It doesn't matter now. You'll probably never speak to me again anyway. Try me, I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. She was quiet for so long, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so soft I had to strain to hear her, she said, Robert's been having an affair. For months. Maybe longer. I felt the familiar ache of empathy, even in the midst of my anger. Oh, Patricia, I'm so sorry. I found out right after David's funeral, she continued. I came home from being with you all day, and he was on the phone with her. Didn't even try to hide it when he saw me listening. Just hung up and told me he wanted a divorce. The timeline made my stomach turn. She'd been dealing with her marriage falling apart while publicly questioning my grief. Why didn't you tell me? Because it felt selfish, she said, fresh tears starting. Your husband was dead, and mine just didn't want me anymore. How could I compete with that kind of pain? It's not a competition, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I could see how she might have felt that way. In our circle of friends, tragedy did tend to become a kind of currency, determining who got the most attention and support. Wasn't it, though? She asked. When's the last time anyone asked me how I was doing? Really asked, not just as an afterthought before launching into questions about you? I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. I couldn't remember the last time I'd asked Patricia about her life, not since David died. I'd been so consumed by my own loss that I'd stopped seeing the people around me as anything other than sources of support. But that realization didn't excuse what she'd done. I understand that you were hurting, I said carefully. But Patricia, you tried to destroy my reputation. You made people question whether my grief was real. Do you have any idea how much damage that's caused? I know, she said miserably. I know, and I hate myself for it. But I was so angry and so hurt, and watching everyone treat you like a saint while I felt like I was disappearing. I just snapped. We sat in heavy silence. I could feel years of friendship cracking apart, but I could also see the pain that had driven her to this point. It didn't excuse her actions, but it made them understandable in a way that was almost worse than if she'd just been cruel for no reason. What do you want from me now? I asked finally. I want to take it all back, she said. I want to undo every conversation, every insinuation, every moment where I chose my jealousy over our friendship. But you can't, I said. No, she agreed. I can't. I stood up, suddenly exhausted. I need time to think about this, Patricia. I need to figure out if there's any way forward from here. She nodded, not looking up at me. I understand if there isn't. As I reached her front door, she called out behind me. Margaret? For what it's worth, I know your grief is real. I've always known it. What I said? It was never really about you. It was about me feeling invisible and taking it out on the person who was getting the attention I wanted. I turned back to look at her one more time. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by her own confession. That might be the most honest thing you've said to me in months, I told her. Driving home, my mind was spinning with everything she'd revealed. The betrayal still stung, but now it was complicated by understanding and even a twisted kind of sympathy. Patricia had been drowning in her own crisis while I'd been consumed by mine, and neither of us had been able to see past our own pain to help the other. When I got home, Emma was waiting in the kitchen, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "What did she say? Did she admit it?" I sank into a chair and rubbed my temples. "She admitted it." "All of it. And it's complicated," I said, then proceeded to tell Emma everything Patricia had revealed. Emma listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Mom," she said finally, "I feel bad that her husband is cheating on her. That's awful, and I can understand why she'd be hurt and angry. But that doesn't excuse what she did to you." "I know," I said. "It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. So what happens now? Are you going to forgive her?" It was the question I'd been dreading, because I honestly didn't know the answer. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "Even understanding why she did it, the damage is done. People in our circle are questioning my grief, Emma. They're watching me differently, analyzing whether my reactions are appropriate or performative." She took away my right to grieve in peace. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But don't let guilt about her situation make you minimize what she did to you." That evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. It was Janet. "I heard you went to see Patricia today," she said without preamble. "News travels fast," I replied. "She called me about an hour ago, crying, apologizing, the whole 9 yards. She told me everything, about Robert, about why she said those things about you, all of it." I waited, unsure what Janet was going to say next. "Margaret, I owe you an apology too," Janet continued. "When Patricia first started making those comments, I should have shut it down immediately. Instead, I let doubt creep in, and I started watching you differently, looking for signs that maybe she was right." "And what did you see?" I asked, not sure I wanted to hear the answer. "I saw a woman grieving her husband exactly the way anyone would expect," Janet said firmly. "I saw someone putting on a brave face when she needed to, and falling apart when she couldn't hold it together anymore. I saw authentic pain, not performance. And I'm ashamed that I ever questioned that, even for a moment." The relief I felt at her words was overwhelming. "Thank you for saying that." "Patricia wants to make this right," Janet said. "She's planning to call everyone she spoke to and tell them the truth. That she was wrong, that she was dealing with her own problems and took it out on you unfairly. Will that be enough?" I asked. "Can you really undo that kind of damage once it's done?" Janet was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But it's a start. The question is, what do you want to happen next?" After I hung up with Janet, I found myself staring out the window into the darkness, thinking about forgiveness and friendship and the complicated ways we hurt each other. Patricia's betrayal had been devastating, but her confession had revealed something equally troubling: how completely I'd failed to see her pain. We'd both been drowning, but in different ways. The difference was, that I'd reached out for help while she'd lashed out in anger. The damage she'd caused was real and significant, but so was the isolation and jealousy that had driven her to it. The phone rang again, interrupting my thoughts. This time, it was Patricia. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "But I wanted to tell you that I've started calling people, to tell them the truth." "How's that going?" I asked. "About as well as you'd expect." Janet was disappointed but understanding. A few others have been less gracious. "But I'm going to call everyone, Margaret. Even if it ruins my reputation, even if people never trust me again. You don't deserve what I did to you." It was a start, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to completely undo the damage. Once doubt is planted, it grows roots that are hard to tear out completely. Still, I could hear the genuine remorse in her voice, and despite everything, it moved me. "Patricia," I said, "I need you to know that while I understand why you did this, I can't just go back to the way things were. You broke something between us that I'm not sure can be repaired." "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know how sorry I am." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house thinking about the strange turns grief can take, how it can bring out the best and worst in people, sometimes simultaneously. Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing her pajamas and carrying 2 cups of tea. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, handing me one of the cups. "Too much to process," I admitted. "Do you think you'll be able to forgive her eventually?" It was the question that had been haunting me all day. "I don't know. Part of me wants to, because I understand her pain now. But another part of me feels like forgiving her too easily would be betraying myself. She didn't just hurt my feelings, Emma. She tried to undermine the legitimacy of my grief when I was at my most vulnerable." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe forgiveness doesn't have to mean going back to being close friends. Maybe it just means letting go of the anger so it doesn't poison you." "When did you get so wise?" I asked, managing a small smile. "I learned from watching you handle Dad's death with so much grace," she said. "Even when it wasn't pretty, even when you were falling apart, you were still honest about what you were feeling. That's not fake or attention-seeking. That's just human." As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that Patricia's betrayal had taught me something unexpected about myself. I'd been so focused on being the perfect grieving widow, strong enough not to burden others, but vulnerable enough to seem appropriately affected, that I'd lost sight of the fact that there was no right way to grieve. No timeline I needed to follow. No performance I needed to maintain. Patricia's cruel words had made me question my own authentic emotions, but in doing so, they'd also forced me to examine them more closely. And what I'd found was exactly what Emma and Janet had seen. Real pain, real love, real loss. Messy and complicated, and sometimes overwhelming, but undeniably genuine. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. I knew what I needed to do. But first, I wanted to talk it through with Emma. I found her in the kitchen, making breakfast with the focused concentration she'd inherited from David. "I've been thinking about Patricia," I said, without preamble. Emma looked up from the eggs she was scrambling. "And?" "I think I need to have one more conversation with her. But this time, I want to do something different." "What do you mean?" I poured myself coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. "I want to ask her if she wants help dealing with her divorce. Not because I'm excusing what she did, but because maybe part of how we got here was both of us being too wrapped up in our own problems to see each other clearly." Emma's eyebrows rose. Mom, are you sure that's wise? After what she did to you? I'm not talking about going back to being best friends, I clarified. But maybe there's a way to acknowledge both things, that she hurt me deeply, and that she was also in pain when she did it. You're a better person than I am, Emma said, bringing her plate over to sit with me. I'm still angry on your behalf. Stay angry, I said. I need you to be angry because I'm not sure I can trust my own judgment about this yet. But I also need to see if there's a way forward that doesn't involve carrying around all this hurt and resentment. Emma nodded slowly. Okay, but I'm driving you to her house, and I'm waiting outside, just in case. Deal, I said. But as I reached for my phone to call Patricia, I realized there was something I needed to know first. Something that would determine not just whether I could forgive her, but whether I could ever trust her again. And the answer to that question would change everything about how this story ended. I set my phone down without making the call and looked at Emma. Before I talk to Patricia, I need to understand something. How long do you think she was saying these things about me? Emma paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? I mean, was this something that just started recently because she was angry about her divorce? Or has she been undermining me for months, maybe even since right after your dad died? The question hung in the air between us. Emma set down her fork completely. Mom, why does that matter now? Because it changes everything? I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. If she said those things in a moment of pain and lashing out, that's one kind of betrayal. But if she's been systematically telling people my grief was fake while comforting me to my face, that's something else entirely. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her thinking through the implications. You know what? She said finally. I think we need to ask Janet. She might know more about the timeline than she let on yesterday. You're right. I reached for my phone again. Janet, it's me. Could you come over this morning? There's something else I need to ask you about Patricia. Of course. Janet's voice came through clearly. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While we waited, Emma and I finished breakfast in relative silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When Janet arrived, I could see the concern written across her face. What's going on? She asked, as Emma let her in. I need you to be completely honest with me about something, I said. When exactly did Patricia start saying these things about my grief? Was it recent, or has it been going on for a while? Janet's face fell, and I knew immediately that I wasn't going to like the answer. Oh, honey, she said softly, sinking into the chair across from me. Just tell me, I said. Janet looked at Emma, then back at me. The first time I heard her say something was about 3 months ago, at the grocery store. She was talking to the cashier about how some people make their problems everyone else's business. My stomach dropped. 3 months ago. That was when I'd been at my lowest point, when getting through each day felt like an impossible task. But I didn't think she was talking about you then, Janet continued quickly. Not until yesterday, when she was more explicit about it. What else did she say 3 months ago? Emma asked, her voice tight. She said something about how grief was no excuse for being self-centered, and how some people use tragedy to get attention. Janet's hands were twisted in her lap. I should have said something then. I should have asked her what she meant. I felt something cold settle in my chest. So, she's been at this for months. While I was crying on her shoulder about missing David, she was out there telling people I was faking it for attention. We don't know that she was talking about you 3 months ago, Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. Don't we? I asked. How many newly widowed people was Patricia dealing with? How many people in our circle were going through public grief that she might have been referring to? The silence that followed answered the question. Janet reached across the table and touched my hand. I'm so sorry. I should have put it together sooner. I should have protected you from this. No, I said, pulling my hand back gently. This isn't your fault. This is about Patricia making a choice. Multiple choices, over months of time. Emma stood up abruptly and started pacing the kitchen. So what now? Do you still want to have that conversation with her about helping her with her divorce? I looked at my daughter, then at Janet, then down at my hands folded on the table. The question Emma was really asking was whether someone who had spent months systematically undermining me while pretending to support me deserved my compassion now that I knew the full scope of what she'd done. But as I sat there, I realized there was still one more thing I needed to know before I could answer that question. And this last piece of information would either confirm my worst fears about Patricia or reveal something that would change how I understood everything that had happened between us. What is it, Mom? Emma stopped pacing and looked at me intently. I can see you thinking something. I took a deep breath. There's something I need to understand about the timeline. Janet, you said the first comment was 3 months ago, and then more explicit things yesterday. But what about in between? Has she been saying things this whole time? Janet's face grew troubled. I've been thinking about that since I got here. There were a few other times, but I dismissed them because she was always so supportive when she was with you. Tell me about the other times. About 6 weeks ago, she mentioned to me that some people process grief differently, and that sometimes what looks like healing is actually just performance. Janet's voice grew smaller. And then maybe 3 weeks ago, she said something about how social media had made everyone think their personal struggles were public entertainment. I felt the blood drain from my face. 6 weeks ago was when I posted that photo of David's garden on Facebook. The one where I talked about feeling like he was still with me when I worked in it. Emma sat back down hard in her chair. And 3 weeks ago was when you shared that article about grief lasting longer than people expect. She liked both of those posts, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She commented supportive things on both of them. Heart emojis and thinking of you messages. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. Patricia hadn't just been undermining me for 3 months. She'd been systematically building a narrative about me being attention-seeking, while simultaneously encouraging me to be more open about my grief. Mom, Emma said carefully, do you think she was setting you up? The question hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to dismiss it, to say that surely no one would be that calculated, that cruel. But as I thought about it, I remembered how Patricia had often been the one to suggest I share more about how I was feeling. How she'd encouraged me to post about David, to talk openly about missing him. I don't know, I said finally, but I need to find out. Janet leaned forward. How? I looked between my daughter and my friend, these two people who had shown me what real support looked like by simply telling me the truth when it mattered. I'm going to ask her directly. Emma's eyes widened. You're going to confront her directly? Mom, are you sure that's the best approach? The afternoon light filtering through the kitchen windows had grown softer, casting long shadows across the table where we sat. I could smell the lingering scent of the coffee we'd been nursing, now grown cold in our cups. Everything felt surreal, like I was planning something completely outside my character. I don't know if it's the best approach, I admitted, running my fingers along the smooth edge of my mug. But I can't live with this uncertainty. I can't have a friendship where I'm constantly wondering what she's really thinking, what she's really saying about me. Janet shifted uncomfortably in her chair. What if she denies it? What if she turns it around and makes you feel like you're the one being unreasonable? The question hit something deep in my chest. I'd been so focused on the betrayal that I hadn't considered how Patricia might react to being confronted. She was skilled at managing conversations, at making people feel heard and understood. What if she used those same skills to make me doubt what I now knew to be true? Then at least I'll know where I stand, I said, though my voice wavered slightly. Right now, I feel like I'm living in some kind of alternate reality where my closest friend has been undermining me for months while pretending to care. Emma reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm, grounding me to the moment. What are you going to say to her? I hadn't thought that far ahead. The revelation was still so fresh, so raw, that I'd been operating on pure emotion. But now, faced with the practical reality of actually having the conversation, I felt the first flutter of real anxiety. I guess I'll start by telling her what I've learned, I said slowly. Give her a chance to explain herself. And if she can't explain? Janet asked quietly. The silence stretched between us. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of a lawnmower, someone else going about their normal Saturday routine, while my world felt like it was tilting on its axis. Then I'll know that everything I thought I knew about our friendship was wrong. The words came out heavier than I'd expected. 20 years, Janet. We've been friends for 20 years. She was at David's funeral. She held my hand while they lowered his casket. Emma's grip on my hand tightened. Mom, maybe that's exactly why this hurts so much. Because it matters. I looked at my daughter, struck again by her wisdom. She was right. If Patricia had been just an acquaintance, her gossip would have stung but not devastated me. It was the depth of trust I'd placed in her that made this betrayal feel so profound. When are you going to talk to her? Janet asked. The question hung in the air. I realized I'd been avoiding thinking about the actual mechanics of this confrontation. Patricia and I usually spoke every few days, often just dropping by each other's houses unannounced. The casual intimacy of our friendship now felt contaminated by what I knew. I don't want to do it over the phone, I said finally. This feels too important for that. You could go to her house, Emma suggested, then immediately looked uncertain. Or maybe that's too confrontational? I don't know the protocol for this kind of thing. Despite everything, I almost smiled. I don't think there is a protocol for confronting your best friend about secretly calling your grief fake. Janet leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. You know, there's something else that's bothering me about all this. The timing of when she started saying these things more explicitly. What do you mean? Yesterday was the anniversary of David's diagnosis, Janet said carefully. The day you found out he was sick, not the day he died. You told me once that in some ways, that day was harder for you than the funeral because it was when your world first started falling apart. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had mentioned that to Patricia just a few days ago, in passing, when she'd asked how I was doing with all the difficult dates that seemed to crop up throughout the year. She knew, I whispered. She knew yesterday was going to be especially hard for me. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Patricia hadn't just chosen a random day to escalate her campaign against me. She'd chosen one of my most vulnerable days, when my grief was already sitting close to the surface. Emma's face had gone pale. "That's not coincidental, is it?" "No," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I don't think it is." The silence stretched between us as the full weight of Patricia's calculated cruelty settled in. I could see Emma processing this revelation, her hands clenched in her lap, while Janet shook her head slowly. "I can't believe someone would be that deliberately hurtful," Emma said finally. "I mean, I know you said she's been saying these things, but to ramp it up on that specific day? It makes me wonder what else I've missed," I admitted. "How many other times has she timed her comments around my difficult days? How long has she been watching my grief like some kind of vulture, waiting for moments when I'm already struggling?" Janet reached across the table and touched my arm. "Don't do that to yourself. Don't start questioning every interaction you've ever had with her. That way lies madness." "But how can I not?" The frustration bubbled up in my voice. If she's capable of this level of manipulation, what else has she done? What other conversations have I had in good faith while she was mentally cataloging my reactions to use against me later? Emma shifted in her chair, looking uncomfortable. "Mom, can I ask you something? And please don't take this the wrong way." I nodded, though I braced myself. "When did you first start noticing that Patricia might be different about your grief? Not the recent stuff with Susan, but before that. Were there signs earlier that you maybe dismissed?" The question stung because it was so perceptive. I found myself thinking back over the past year, sifting through memories I'd perhaps willfully ignored. "There were little things," I said slowly. "Comments that felt off at the time, but I told myself I was being too sensitive. She'd make these observations about how I was doing so much better, on days when I was actually struggling, but trying to put on a brave face. Or she'd compare my grief to other widows she knew, always in ways that made me feel like I wasn't measuring up to some standard." "What kind of comparisons?" Janet asked, her voice gentle but probing. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. She'd tell me about Margaret down the street, who was back to hosting dinner parties 6 months after her husband died. Or about her sister-in-law who threw herself into volunteering and seemed so positive about everything. Always with this tone that suggested I should be following their example. Emma's expression darkened. "That's horrible, Mom. Grief isn't a competition." "I know that now, but at the time, I was so vulnerable and uncertain about whether I was handling things right that her comments just made me question myself more. I thought she was trying to encourage me." Janet leaned forward. "But looking back now, with what you know about what she's been saying behind your back, how do those comments feel?" "Like she was testing me," I said, the realization hitting me as I spoke. Like she was gauging my reactions to see how much I'd internalize her criticism. And when I started doubting myself more, she probably felt validated in her belief that my grief was somehow performative. The room fell quiet again. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, marking time that felt suddenly precious. How many conversations with Patricia had I endured, walking away feeling worse about myself without fully understanding why? Emma broke the silence. "What are you going to say to her when you see her?" "I honestly don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to lay out everything I've learned and demand an explanation. But another part of me wonders if there's any explanation that would make this okay. "Maybe the explanation isn't for you," Janet suggested. "Maybe it's for her. Maybe she needs to hear herself say out loud what she's been doing, so she can understand how toxic it's been." I considered this. "You think she doesn't realize how harmful she's being?" "I think some people get so caught up in their own narratives that they lose sight of the actual human being they're talking about," Janet replied. Patricia might have convinced herself that she's being helpful somehow, or that she's the voice of reason in a situation where everyone else is enabling you. Emma made a disgusted sound. Enabling her grief? What kind of twisted logic is that? The kind that lets people justify being cruel while feeling righteous about it, Janet said grimly. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden David and I had planted together 3 years ago. The roses were blooming now, something he'd never see. Patricia had been here that first spring after he died, when I'd broken down crying at the sight of the buds forming. She'd held me while I sobbed, told me it was beautiful that something David had planted was still growing. Had she gone home that day and told someone I was being dramatic about flowers? I think I need to see her soon, I said, still looking out at the roses, before I lose my nerve or start second-guessing myself into inaction. When? Emma asked. I turned back to face them both. Tomorrow morning. Patricia always does her gardening on Saturday mornings. I'll go over then, when she's outside and I can approach naturally. Do you want one of us to come with you? Janet offered. The temptation was strong. Having backup felt appealing when facing such a difficult conversation. But something told me this needed to be between Patricia and me, at least initially. I think I need to handle this alone, I said. But could you both be available afterward, in case I need to process whatever happens? Of course, Emma said immediately. I'll stay here tomorrow. Janet, can you come back? I'll be here, Janet promised. But what if Patricia denies everything? What if she tries to turn it back on you somehow? I hadn't fully considered this possibility, but I realized it was likely. Patricia was skilled at making me doubt myself. Tomorrow's conversation would probably involve more of the same tactics. Then at least I'll know where I stand, I said. And I'll know that trying to salvage this friendship isn't worth the damage it's doing to my healing. Emma stood up and came to stand beside me at the window. I'm proud of you, Mom. This is really hard, but you're facing it head on. I don't feel brave, I admitted. I feel terrified and angry and sad all at once. That sounds about right for this situation, Janet said. The question is, what do you hope to accomplish tomorrow? What would a successful conversation look like? I thought about this as we all stood there, the three of us united in this small crisis that felt enormous to me. I want her to understand what she's done, I said finally. I want her to stop, and if she can't or won't do those things, I want to be clear about what that means for our friendship. But even as I said it, I realized there was something else I wanted, something I was almost afraid to voice. I wanted to understand why. Why had my oldest friend chosen to wound me when I was already broken? What had I done to deserve such calculated cruelty during the worst period of my life? As if reading my thoughts, Janet said quietly, "Just remember, her reasons might not make sense to you, and they definitely won't excuse what she's done." I nodded, but privately wondered if I was strong enough to hear Patricia's truth without it destroying what little remained of my faith in our friendship. Tomorrow morning felt both too soon and not soon enough. That evening, after Janet left with promises to return the next day, Emma and I sat in the kitchen picking at leftover dinner. The conversation about Patricia had drained us both, but neither of us seemed ready to retreat to our separate spaces. I keep thinking about when you and Patricia first became friends, Emma said, pushing rice around her plate. You used to tell me stories about your college adventures together. The time you both got locked out of the dorm in your pajamas, how she helped you study for organic chemistry? I smiled despite everything. She was the reason I didn't drop out of pre-med my sophomore year. I was so overwhelmed, ready to change majors, and she basically moved into my room for 2 weeks to help me catch up. So what changed? Emma asked. I mean, people don't just become cruel overnight. There had to be signs. I considered this carefully. Looking back with fresh eyes, I could see patterns I'd missed or excused over the years. She always had opinions about my choices. When I married your father, she made comments about how I was settling down too young. When I got pregnant with you, she said I was throwing away my career potential, but she framed it as concern for my happiness. Emma's fork clinked against her plate. That doesn't sound like concern. That sounds like judgment. I told myself she just wanted what was best for me, and sometimes her advice was good. She talked me out of a few genuinely bad decisions over the years. I paused, remembering. But she also had a way of making me second-guess myself, even when I was happy with my choices. Did Dad ever say anything about her? The mention of my late husband brought a familiar ache, but it felt gentler now, less raw than it had in months. He was always polite to Patricia, but he used to say she had a talent for making people feel small while pretending to build them up. I defended her back then. Emma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Maybe that's why this hurts so much. It's not just about her spreading rumors. It's about realizing that someone you trusted never really supported you the way you thought. Her insight surprised me. When had my daughter become so wise about relationships? I'd been so focused on my own grief that I'd missed how much she'd grown, how deeply she understood human nature. When did you get so smart about people? I asked. Emma laughed, but it was tinged with sadness. Losing Dad changed how I see everything, including how I see you. I watch people's reactions to your grief, Mom. I see who shows up and who makes excuses. I see who asks how you're really doing versus who just wants you to be better already. That's a heavy burden for someone your age. Maybe, but it's also shown me what real love looks like. The way you and Dad were together, the way you've handled losing him, the way you're still trying to see the best in Patricia even after what she's done. Emma's voice grew stronger. That's taught me more about being a good person than any lecture ever could. I felt tears threatening, but they were different from the grief tears I'd grown accustomed to. These felt cleaner somehow, touched with gratitude for this unexpected gift from such a painful time. I'm scared about tomorrow, I admitted. Not just about confronting Patricia, but about what it means if our friendship is really over. She's been part of my life for 30 years. I don't know who I am without that history. Emma stood up and moved to the chair next to me. You're the same person you've always been, Mom. Patricia doesn't get to define that. And honestly, maybe losing someone who's been undermining you for years isn't actually a loss. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and I found myself really looking at Emma. She had her father's steady presence, but something uniquely her own too. A quiet strength that reminded me of myself at her age, before decades of Patricia's subtle criticisms had worn away at my confidence. I want you to know something, I said. Watching how you've handled this whole situation, how you've supported me while dealing with your own grief, how you've grown into this incredible young woman. Your father would be so proud. I'm so proud. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I learned from the best, both of you. Later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about the conversation ahead of me. For the first time, I felt something besides dread about facing Patricia. Emma was right. I was the same person I'd always been, underneath all the doubt and pain. Tomorrow wasn't about salvaging a friendship that might have been damaging me for years. It was about reclaiming my own sense of truth. I thought about my husband, about how he'd always believed in my judgment even when I didn't believe in it myself. About Emma's fierce loyalty and Janet's unwavering support. About the life I was slowly, carefully rebuilding. Patricia's opinion of my grief, of my healing process, of who I was as a person, suddenly seemed far less important than it had even hours ago. The real question wasn't whether she would apologize or change. The real question was whether I was ready to stop letting her voice carry more weight than my own. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without dreading the morning. But as dawn approached, I woke with a start, realizing that Patricia's car was already in her driveway, and she was standing at her kitchen window, looking directly at my house with an expression I couldn't quite read. I pulled my robe tighter around myself and stepped away from my bedroom window, my heart hammering against my ribs. There had been something unsettling about Patricia's expression, a kind of cold calculation that made my stomach clench with unease. The clock on my nightstand read 6:47 a.m., far too early for either of us to normally be awake, yet there she'd been, fully dressed and watching my house like a sentinel. The coffee maker gurgled to life downstairs, and I heard Emma's soft footsteps in the kitchen. Even after everything we'd discussed last night, the thought of actually confronting Patricia made my hands shake as I reached for my clothes. I'd fallen asleep feeling strong and clear-headed, but seeing her there, so deliberate and watchful, brought back all my old uncertainties. By the time I made it to the kitchen, Emma had already set out 2 mugs and was scrambling eggs at the stove. The morning light streaming through our window felt different somehow, charged with the weight of what lay ahead. "You saw her too," Emma said without turning around. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Your footsteps. They had that careful, worried sound." She glanced over her shoulder at me. "Mom, whatever she's planning, whatever dramatic scene she's rehearsed in her head, you don't have to play along." I accepted the plate Emma handed me, though my appetite had vanished completely. The eggs looked perfect, fluffy and golden the way my husband used to make them, but they might as well have been cardboard. What if she denies everything? What if she turns it around somehow? Makes me look like the problem? Emma sat down across from me, her own breakfast untouched. "Then you'll know exactly who she really is. And honestly, Mom, isn't that better than spending the rest of your life wondering?" The phone rang, startling us both. Janet's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a flutter of relief mixed with apprehension. "I hope I'm not calling too early," Janet said when I answered, her voice tight with concern. "But I just got off the phone with my sister Karen. She lives 2 streets over from you, and she was out walking her dog when she saw Patricia knocking on your door about 20 minutes ago. Karen said when no one answered, Patricia walked around to your backyard and tried the gate." My blood turned to ice water. "She what?" Karen was far enough away that she couldn't see everything clearly, but she said Patricia spent several minutes back there before coming back to the front and leaving. I thought you should know. Emma was already moving toward the sliding door that led to our back patio, her face grim. I followed, my bare feet cold against the kitchen tiles. Our small backyard looked normal at first glance. The garden I'd been neglecting since my husband's death, the patio furniture still covered with autumn leaves I hadn't had the energy to sweep away. But then Emma pointed to the gate latch. "Look at this, Mom." The metal latch hung slightly open, though I was certain I'd secured it after bringing in the garbage cans yesterday. More troubling, there were fresh footprints in the soft dirt around my husband's workshop, a small shed where he'd spent countless hours building birdhouses and fixing broken things. "She was looking through the windows," Emma said, her voice flat with anger. "These prints go all around the building." I pressed my phone closer to my ear, realizing Janet was still waiting for a response. "She was in my backyard, Janet." She was looking in the workshop windows. Oh, honey. Janet's voice carried a mixture of outrage and deep concern. That's not just inappropriate, well, it's trespassing. What could she possibly be looking for? I thought about the workshop, about the small space that had been so purely my husband's domain. His tools still hung exactly where he'd left them. His reading glasses still sat on the workbench next to a half-finished birdhouse he'd never gotten to complete. I'd barely been able to go in there myself. The grief was too raw, too immediate. The idea of Patricia peering through these windows, of her eyes moving over his private space, made me feel physically sick. I don't know, I whispered, but I'm going to find out. Emma was examining the workshop door itself now, and her sharp intake of breath made my stomach drop. Mom, come look at this. The door handle showed fresh scratches around the lock, small but unmistakable marks as if someone had tried to turn it forcefully or had inserted something into the mechanism. She tried to get inside, I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. Janet, she actually tried to break into the workshop? Janet's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Margaret, I think we need to consider that Patricia's behavior has moved beyond just spreading rumors. This feels unbalanced. Invasive in a way that's genuinely concerning. Emma had moved to stand beside me, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. What could she want in there? Dad's workshop was just his hobby space. I tried to think through the contents of the small building. Tools, half-finished projects, boxes of screws and nails organized in my husband's methodical way. Nothing valuable, nothing that would interest someone looking for... What? What was she looking for? Unless, I said slowly, a cold realization beginning to form. She wasn't looking for something to take. Maybe she was looking for something to use against me. Emma's grip on my shoulder tightened. What do you mean? Think about it. She's been telling people my grief is fake, right? What if she's looking for evidence that I've moved on too quickly? Maybe she expected to find the workshop cleaned out or changed somehow. Proof that I'm not really as devastated as I claim to be. Janet's voice came through the phone with sharp clarity. Or maybe she was looking for something to justify her own behavior. Some reason to tell people you're not the grieving widow you appear to be. The three-way conversation felt surreal, standing in my backyard in my robe at 7 a.m, discussing my oldest friend's apparent descent into something that felt genuinely dangerous. The Patricia I'd known for 30 years would never have trespassed, would never have tried to break into someone's private space. But then again, the Patricia I'd known for 30 years would never have spread cruel rumors about my grief either. I'm coming over, Janet said. Right now. Don't do anything until I get there. As I hung up the phone, I noticed Patricia's car pulling back into her driveway. She got out slowly, deliberately, and this time when she looked toward our house, she didn't try to hide it. She stood there in her driveway, staring directly at Emma and me in our backyard, with an expression that was no longer cold calculation. It was pure, unmistakable hostility. Standing there in my backyard, feeling Patricia's hostile stare burning into me, something fundamental shifted in my chest. For months, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if maybe I was grieving wrong, if somehow I deserved the whispered criticisms and sideways glances. But watching my oldest friend climb out of her car after attempting to break into my husband's sacred workshop space, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced since David's funeral. This wasn't about my grief being inadequate. This was about Patricia's inability to accept that grief looks different for everyone. Emma's hand squeezed my shoulder. Mom, she's still staring. I turned away from Patricia's glare, guiding Emma back toward the house. Let her stare. Janet's coming over and we're going to handle this properly. Inside, I made coffee with shaking hands, the familiar ritual helping to ground me. Emma sat at the kitchen table, occasionally peering through the window toward Patricia's house. You know what bothers me most? I said, measuring coffee grounds with the same careful precision David used to use. It's not even the rumors. It's that she's made me doubt myself. Made me question whether the way I've been processing losing your father is somehow wrong. Emma looked up from the window. How so? I've been second-guessing everything. When I laugh at something funny, I wonder if someone will think I'm not sad enough. When I cry, I wonder if it's too much, too dramatic. She's made me perform my own grief instead of just living it. The coffee maker gurgled to life, and I leaned against the counter, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. But seeing her try to break into Dad's workshop, that crossed a line I didn't even know existed. That space is sacred, Emma. It's where he spent his last good months, building that birdhouse collection for the garden. The one you still haven't been able to hang up, Emma said gently. I nodded, tears threatening again. Because I'm not ready, and that's okay. That's allowed. Grief doesn't follow Patricia's timeline or anyone else's. A car door slammed outside, and I saw Janet hurrying up the front walk, her expression grim with determination. Emma let her in, and Janet immediately pulled me into a fierce hug. I've been thinking the entire drive over, Janet said without preamble. This behavior from Patricia, it's escalated to the point where you need to protect yourself. But more importantly, you need to reclaim your right to grieve however feels authentic to you. We settled around the kitchen table with coffee, and Janet leaned forward with the intensity I remembered from our college days when she was solving everyone's problems. Patricia's actions tell me she's looking for ammunition to justify what she's been saying about you. She expected to find evidence that you've moved on too quickly, that you're not really devastated. When she couldn't find that evidence naturally, she decided to go looking for it. Emma frowned. But what could she possibly find in Dad's workshop that would prove anything? Maybe she expected to find it cleaned out and organized? I said slowly. Or maybe she thought I'd gotten rid of his things, or changed it somehow. She doesn't know that I haven't been able to bring myself to touch anything in there. Janet nodded. Exactly. She's created this narrative where your grief is performance, and now she's desperately trying to find proof to support it. But here's what she doesn't understand. Grief isn't a competition or a performance. It's a deeply personal process that looks different for everyone. As if summoned by our conversation, there was a sharp knock at the front door. Through the glass, I could see Patricia's silhouette, her posture rigid with whatever confrontation she'd come to deliver. Emma started to get up, but I placed my hand on her arm. No, this one's mine. I opened the door to find Patricia standing on my porch, her face flushed with an anger that seemed to have been building for months. I know you saw me this morning, she said without greeting. And before you start making accusations, I was checking on a water leak that might be affecting both our properties. The lie was so transparent, so obviously rehearsed, that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Patricia, I said quietly. David's workshop is nowhere near the property line, and water leaks don't require trying to force open locked doors. Her face reddened further. I don't know what you think you saw, but I saw my friend of 30 years trying to break into my late husband's workshop at 6 a.m. What I don't understand is why. For a moment, Patricia's mask slipped, and I saw something desperate underneath. Because everyone thinks you're handling this so well, Margaret. Everyone talks about how strong you are, how gracefully you're moving forward. But I know better. I know you're not as devastated as you pretend to be." The words hung in the air between us, finally spoken aloud after months of whispered insinuations. I felt Janet and Emma behind me, their presence giving me strength. "And what exactly would be wrong with handling things well?" I asked. "What would be wrong with finding moments of strength or even happiness while I grieve my husband?" Patricia's expression grew more agitated. "Because real grief doesn't look like that. Real grief doesn't bounce back so quickly." There it was, the heart of everything. Patricia's own rigid expectations about what grief should look like, projected onto me with such force that she'd convinced herself my process was somehow fraudulent. "Patricia," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "David and I were married for 28 years. In those 28 years, we talked about death. We talked about what we'd want for each other if one of us died first. And do you know what David made me promise?" She stared at me, silent. "He made me promise that I wouldn't disappear into grief, that I wouldn't let losing him mean losing myself too. So when I laugh at something funny, when I have a good day, when I find moments of joy, I'm not betraying his memory. I'm honoring his wishes." Patricia's jaw worked soundlessly, and I could see her struggling with this information that didn't fit her narrative. "My grief is real, Patricia. It's also private, and it's mine. The fact that it doesn't look like what you expected doesn't make it fake. It makes it mine.